Welcome to the Bullpen Show, powered by Architech Sports. I'm Austin Alexander, and we're going to talk a lot about Architech Sports here in just a moment. We've got the CEO, the founder, the head honcho at Architech Sports, Alan Tyson. We'll bring him in just a moment. First, I want to get to some information that's DP related. By now, you've had a chance to see all the player rankings. Those are things you guys really enjoy. You chew them up and get a little fired up over where we've got guys ranked. But for a good ranking, we've got all that stuff up for you on thediamondprospects.com. All that information from our updated 26 rankings to 2027, 28s, and our first ranking of the 2029 class, this year's freshmen. So all of that information's on there. And by the time you're listening to this, we will have also spit out a lot of the information that we've gotten a chance to see over the weekend with all the, it's baseball season and preseason tournaments are everywhere. We've deployed our staff. We're trying to get out and see as much as we possibly can. When the weather cooperates, we're sitting at somebody's backstop pretty much every night. All that information throughout the spring. We'll bring you all that as you're accustomed to throughout the spring on thediamondprospects.com. I want to stop there and I want to come right back to our guest, Alan Tyson. First of all, how are you today? And I appreciate you coming on the show as well.
Yeah, thanks so much, Austin. I've looked forward to this for a month now, so it's awesome, and we appreciate our relationship already.
Well, for those that are listening to us, Alan, if you've paid attention to everything we've got on all social media, anything that we put out on our website, you may see this new logo where we've got the partner, and it's Architech Sports, headed up by Alan Tyson and his team of folks. They've got 15 different facilities throughout, mostly Charlotte, but also in Greenville and the Rock Hill area, one in Indian Land and one in Fort Mill. So they're invading into South Carolina. We're certainly glad to have them. And as a partner, it's something that we're very excited about because you bring to the table something that is very, very important to our audience. And for me, as a parent who have two kids that play, and a lot of folks that are listening to this as well, this is going to be a very, very informative podcast. We're going to talk a lot about arm care, body care, what it takes to keep guys healthy so that they can stay off of the operating table, right? We want to try to keep these guys healthy. And this is the guy that's been doing it for 36 years. He's been a physical therapist and he's done it at a very, very high level. So Alan, we just want to kind of start right there. You've got a very extensive background. I've known your name for quite a while. We've got a lot of guys, and you may call them clients, but I also know that they're very important people in your life, guys that I've coached, a lot of names that folks may know. You've been doing this for a while. And in 2008, you started Architect Sports. But if you could kind of dial it back a little bit forward, give us a little bit about your background and how Architect Sports was born.
Yeah, so thanks, Austin. I started treating way back in 1991. I got out of PT school from Chapel Hill. And early on, that's when the Panthers the Panthers coming in 95, the Hornets came in 88. So I was very blessed at a early age in my career to also work with the AAA affiliate of the Indians at the time, the Charlotte Knights. And so what we discovered was back in the day when insurance wasn't as limiting, I would have these athletes after surgery and I would have to take them from surgery through rehab and then actually back on the field, conditioning, doing everything. And my running joke when we were doing stuff with the Hornets back in the day was I'd give the player back to the strength coach and I would say, hey, you cannot break them. They're ready to play. And so nowadays in PT, you have some visits limitations. And so you can't really get them as far back, but there's always this appreciation for strength coaches, trainers, and what the PT did. And so over the course of that, as we did that, we opened up the first sports performance facility in Charlotte, 2001. And then we kind of escalated as the orthopedic groups in town grew, the hospital group grew. We couldn't do some of the things I felt like we should do as far as having equipment, have space, have places to run, have places to throw. So we opened up Architect in 2008, and we've got, been very blessed to have great people that work for us, great staff. And we just opened our sports science lab. In fact, we've got a grand opening next week. And so it's kind of evolved from there. But because of that, right, athletes come to where they can train. They come to where they want data. And even more today than obviously it was in 1991 and 2001. And so we've been very blessed that, athletes have kind of sought us out. And from there, though, we've learned and we've networked with, trainers and strength coaches around the country because they've played at various levels. And then when we started in 08, one of my business partners at the time was Coach Frank Reich, who's, now he's just his offensive coordinator with the Jets. But he was getting back to the NFL and played for a while. So that gave me an opportunity to kind of travel wherever he was in the NFL, from Indy to San Diego to Philly to Indianapolis, and really sit there and learn from their strength coaches and trainers on what they were doing, because obviously they had a little larger budget than I did in the NFL. And so we had a lot more toys, things like that, different philosophies. So just a very eclectic, and as you know, this being a coach, the world kind of, the more, a few people and the world kind of shrinks, right? So it's a smaller world than you really think it is. And so, now you have colleagues around the country, and so you pick their brains and stuff. And it's just been a lot of fun. I mean, we were sharing before the show, right? I hadn't worked in 35 years, 36 years. And so you really enjoy it, because every kid that comes in is has so much potential, and you see that potential. And I guess that's me being a parent of two boys, but you see that potential, and you see the little 12-year-old, and you've worked with enough 25-year-olds that you see this potential and you just want to help the kid not get hurt or to increase his velo and things. And so you start designing a program that's not like, oh, here's how you protect your arm, but here's how you protect your arm, and actually you'll throw harder. And the kid, you can see the kid kind of light up, because they're all chasing velo, so to speak. But here's how you chase velo. And as I told a kid yesterday, it's not how hard you throw, it's how long you can throw that hard. And so they want to chase it, but it's like, chase it, and it's like a dog chasing the car. If you catch it, may not be the best thing, because your arm mechanic suffered, or your follow through mechanic suffered, and now you've got some aches and pains. And so it's been a good ride, and we're looking forward to doing more with you guys. We shared before that when we go into an area, we always look for who works with the best athletes and who does the best job of putting the athlete's health first, which means they're going to do some partnerships and let people come in and talk to parents, sometimes free, because we're a value add. And then once we have that relationship, then we grow it together, right? And so that when we went to Greenville, your name and Diamond Prospects came up all the time. And so we wanted to be able to help the best players, because when we help the best players, it trickles down to middle school and little league. And that's kind of where it all starts, right? You and I were sharing about where these arm injuries start, and they start early. And it kind of goes in our profession, right? You hear about year round, someone playing a sport year round. And so I wish we could change some of that, but I don't think that's going to happen a whole lot because of specialization. So there's things you got to do if you're going to play year round. But the key is like when you're coaching a college kid, even pro, right? You got a mature body. And when you're coaching the little league, middle school, early high school athletes, they're all maturing at different levels. That's when arm care, is critical and takes a precedence, so that by the time they would get to you Elon, or at college level, they're not already hurt. They haven't had Tommy John yet. They haven't had, medial elbow pain yet, things like that. So like I said, it's a lot of fun. I get to do it, 3 days a week now, because I've got some business, some meetings I have to go through that I didn't used to have to go to back in the day. But I'm pretty unique in the fact that I still treat, and hopefully I can continue to treat. But we've got great staff and great athletes. I mean, former athletes that are PTs now, so they get kind of the athletic mentality.
Well, your name has been a foremost name, certainly in the Carolinas for a long, long time. So when your name and of course Architect came across my desk, I piqued my interest, and so we're very fortunate to bring you guys on board and serve as a partnership with you guys, because we really believe in what you guys do, and your goals obviously are to try to see kids be able to stay healthy and be able to compete at an optimal level. And one of the things you kind of hit on right there, Alan, you talked about specialization, but I also know you guys treat kids from all, and folks from all different sports. You mentioned some of the other different sports in the outset. Talk a little bit about the different sports that you guys deal with, but then if you could pull it back to, baseball and the sport of baseball, and we will talk a little bit more specifically about arm care as well. But first, if you could hit on, the different sports that guys play, but also the specialization and your opinions on that.
Yeah, so we'll treat the full spectrum, right? We have a big contingent of female athletes. They have unique needs. We shouldn't train them like we do guys. They're different, for sure. And they've got different landing mechanics when they have knee issues, things like that. And we treat a ton of NFL guys, because Charlotte's a good area to live, and a bunch of retired guys come here. They train during the off season. So all your sports. But what was interesting is back in the day, probably mid 90s, there was a big movement in our profession, physical therapy, about dealing with golfers. You see a lot of golfers, and there was two schools of thought. There was one, you go to a course and it would look at back pain, spine care, because they typically have a lot of spine issues. There was another course though that would just look at mechanics, right? Here's the mechanics of the swing. If you're tight, here's how you'll compensate. So I was a baseball player growing up, middle infielder. So I always had an interest in that. So for golf, we would video the swing and we would take them on the table. What's tight, what's weak, and then correlate those two things, right? So if you can't make a full turn, is that because your hips are tight or your thoracic spine's tight? Well, then I started thinking like, I think I could do that for pitching. And so I called up then the coach at Davidson, Dick Cook, Dick Cook. All right. And so Dick was nice enough to he literally spent 3 hours in a training room with me one afternoon up in Davidson College and said, Dick, I need 5 things that we can agree upon on mechanics, right? Because there's all over the place. And so we worked through about 5 things that any physical therapist could understand. Very simple stuff. And then so we started looking at mechanics of guys, little leaguers, middle school, high school, college guys. Now I was seeing them all that were hurt at the time. All right. But I wanted to get out in the community and say, here's how I think I can improve velo and mechanics and things like that. But I never could get out the door to promote this performance program because I got labeled the guy who you see if you have a shoulder or elbow issue, right? And so we had them coming from all over. And but we've refined that since then. But really, the bottom line is you have strength issues, flexibility issues, and then movement issues, right? And movement issues, as you know, as a coach, is going to be just their mechanics, right? So they may get by with some quirky mechanics if their strength and flexibility is good, right? But if they have a low elbow, don't follow through well, front side opens too soon, and then they're not good in their upper back, then they're going to have issues, right? So we put those two things together and then started designing programs, and it kind of just went from there. We see I'd probably see knees and shoulders the most, but obviously when we look at mechanics, having the ability to take a young person and correlate mechanics to their flexibility and strength deficits lets them buy into the program more. So I think we get better compliance. So you're not just doing a cuff program because you need to strengthen your arm. You're doing a cuff program to work on your decel mechanics, and the kids buy into it more and they'll stick with it more because it's a performance program. Okay. So we started doing that probably late 90s. And just kind of built it from there. And, we've got 4, Elliot, Tolley's running our Greenville office. Chris Cox, who played in college, is running our Fort Mill and Indianland offices. Trey Allison, who played at Catawba, is up in Concord. So we tend to attract, athletes that are going to PT school because they're competitive, they're driven, they know the athlete's mentality, but they're all good, understanding baseline. So I tell people we're not pitching coaches for sure. I'm not stepping on any pitching coach, right? But it's nice when we can understand throwing mechanics, because most pitching coaches I know would rather work with someone how to pitch rather than how to throw. And so if we can get them to throw consistently, then the fun part is how to pitch and how you set up a hitter and what you should throw in this count and what's working today and what are you going to do if it's not working. So all those sort of things, it's just a lot of fun when we start kind of putting both together.
Of course. One of the things you and I talked about before we began recording was youth pitchers, and we see all the arm injuries. And the example I gave you, and I'll use it again here, is having a background and being a college pitching coach for a number of years. Fortunately, didn't have a lot of surgeries, but surgeries certainly do happen, and they've just become very widespread in our game. And the question you obviously get when you're over arm care and you're certainly over the pitching staff is, why are guys getting hurt so much? Why do we see it so much at the high school level, professional level, certainly at the college level as well? And I had one philosophy back then. I've got a different philosophy now, having raised a couple of boys and gone through the youth levels, and I get a chance to see, unfortunately, the abuse that happens at that level. The odometer for these pitchers is so out of control before they even get to the high school level because of their usage when they were trying to win a tournament in 9U, 10U, 11, whatever, the recovery times, inactivity in between times they were pitching on Saturdays and Sundays, what they would do the rest of the week, and things along those lines. That sort of abuse or negligence is what would happen. And you see guys all of a sudden they get hurt at the high school level, the college level, the professional level, and they're expiring on the watches of these coaches who had no shot to be able to do anything differently. If you could kind of talk to your thoughts on youth, because you will have a wide range of people that are listening to us right now. Some are going to be youth parents and coaches. Some are going to be guys that are in college, pro, and etc. Talk through your thoughts on that process and how guys could stay healthy so that they're able to be on the field at the higher levels.
It's interesting, Austin. I think what the research shows, a couple of articles from, they're actually 15 years old, and sometimes things are common sense. It got kind of get hidden or hidden in the literature. And there's an article out of a physician out of Florida. They talked about just follow through. The better the follow through, the better your decel mechanics are. So when I say follow through, if I'm a right hand pitcher, I'm going to go right elbow by left knee. So I'm going to really bend my back over. And understanding that mechanically, physically, when you let the ball go out of your hand, you've got about 1 time's body weight pulling your arm out of socket. Right. So, and I always tell the kids, like, if you're throwing 80, all right, how fast is the hand going? Right. It's getting clocked right out of your hand, right? So it's going 80 miles per hour. So the ball is going to stop in roughly 54, 55 feet. The hand's going to stop in 3 feet. Now, and I always kid the kids, like, don't try this in your car. Like, you can't go from 80 to 0 in 3 feet, but your hand does. So your body says, okay, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to adapt to that, right? So what gets tight? Back of my shoulder and my forearm. So those two things are very common. However, if I decelerate my arm over a larger period of time, if I follow through well, then it's like putting on the brakes over a 1/4 mile period as opposed to just slamming on the brakes. And so if you do that from the time you're 10 to the time you're, 15 and your growth plate's open, there's going to be some stress somewhere, right? And then matters how hard you throw. Obviously, the only thing in the literature that correlates to injuries is velo, right? So that doesn't mean you're going to throw less hard. We go to these national conventions and some physicist gets up there and says, well, it's velo, so, guys shouldn't throw as hard. Obviously, that's not going to happen. So if we could get the kids to understand follow through is the most important thing. So again, right elbow, because you have to define it, right? Because everyone follows through, but there's a good follow through and there's a poor follow through. And I think what's interesting in the last probably 6, 7 years is that you don't see kids finish down the mound. You don't see them follow through as well as Nolan or Maddox or Clemens or these guys, right? So they would have a full follow through, be in a nice fielding positions. These kids today have more of a recoil, and that recoil, although I'm still looking for research that shows it actually produces more velo, but it definitely is a stress on the arm. There's no doubt, right? And that makes everything tight. So then when it gets tighter, things are going to break down. Very clear in the literature. If the one thing, now, most of the kids have to define it. As they're growing, though, the one muscle group that gets tight in young men as they grow is the back of your legs, your hamstrings. So they got to be able to touch their toes. They got to be able to follow through. And remember, they're throwing downhill, right? So their body's sideways. I always kid them. You're throwing downhill, the body sideways, you're rotating, and you got to throw a straight line. So it takes some athleticism to do that, and balance and strength on that landing leg. And so we've got to strengthen that landing leg a lot to make sure they can follow through. And so if we do those two things, the rest kind of takes care of itself, and then you go from there. The second thing is how strong your upper back muscles are. So when kids are doing band work, things like that, they tend to have a little too much resistance at times. And so then you're just working your shoulder, right? And your deltoid is neither here nor there. It's really your scapular muscles, because that's where your rotator cuff muscles attach. And the more you can do upper back work, and we've told parents, like, for a pitcher, like 3 to 1, right? Because we're all, I'm sitting in front of a computer talking to you right now. Then I've got this little, rectangle device right here. I'm going to be in front of that some. All right. Then I'm going to be driving. All right. And I'm going to be hunched over all day. For kids, they're going to be in school. They're going to be studying. And then all of a sudden, they got to get their arm and lay back. All right. Way back there. And we expect everything to work perfectly. And it just doesn't happen. And so posture is key. And so when we say 3 to 1, that means 3 times as many pull exercises as we do push exercises. So the run joke in therapy is like, when you go to therapy, you work, when you go to the gym, you work everything you see in the mirror. I work my pecs and my abs and my quads. When you go to therapy, you work everything you don't see in the mirror. You work your upper back, your low back, your butt, your hamstrings. All could do that more, we'd be better. And so, and again, for the kids, it's all your decel. And so the more we can do that, and they can decel appropriately with a follow through, it's so much better.
I'd like for you to talk a little bit about the different variations of how an arm feels. You talk to a young player, how's your arm feel? It either feels great or it's hurt. It hurts. We all know that there's a lot of different variations in there. If
Yeah.
you kind of could talk to the young player, and you know what, even the high school, college player who's needing to learn his arm, and also explain to his pitching coach or his physical therapist how his arm feels, so that he can paint a picture for that pitching coach or that PT guy to be able to assist him. Idea of the terminology and the different in a wide range of what a pitcher can feel from one start to another.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, Austin. When you were coaching, coaching, young kids and in college, what would you want the kid to tell you to give you a sign that, like, all right, I need to change up a little bit with him based on what he tell you?
Well, it pertains to arm recovery. I would often, if a guy had thrown X amount of pitches, maybe gotten extended, let's just say, 65 to 75 pitches the day before, I'm in constant communication with him the next day and the next day and the next day. But y'all use terminology, particularly if he's a two-way player. Can you play a position today? Maybe the day after. 2 days later, can you play a position today? If it's a PO or maybe even a two-way guy that I want to see if you could, if I need you to get a batter, or if I need you to get an inning or two today, could you do that? And try to get and I always ask them on non-pitch days or non-game days.
Yeah.
Oftentimes going to tell
Yeah.
you, yes, I can. Yes, I can. They're seldom ever going to tell you they can't go. They'll be real honest with you on a day where there's nothing on the line. And so that's how I would try to, help, because everybody's arm does recover at different rates.
Yeah.
That would be one way that I would try to generate dialogue with the pitcher, so that it would help me understand how his arm recovers based on what I know he had done the day before, 2 days before, 3 days before.
Yeah. So I think we try to start off with just kind of a couple variables, right? So does their elbow straighten all the way out? Every parent should look at their kid and put their arms out to the side. Does it straighten out equal to the other elbow? Right. And you can just look at your kid and tell that. If not, that's a red flag right there. That either they're growing fast, they've got tightness in their forearm, but that's a precursor to little leaguer's elbow, Tommy John, ultimately some osteochondral defects that can happen in the elbow joint. All right. Secondly, put their hands behind their back. So when they put one arm behind their back and the other arm behind their back, they should be within a fist difference. So the throwing side should be a little tighter. All right. But if there's more than a fist, they need to do some stretching back of the shoulder, or need to work on that. Right? But as far as soreness goes, it's common to have some soreness back of your shoulder. I shouldn't say soreness, tightness. I would say tightness. And I think that's a big thing, right? So you almost have to, as a coach, as a parent, racially define soreness, pain, stiffness, because if I'm a 12-year-old, I don't know the difference between anything, right? And so pain could be stiffness. So you have to define it and what that means, and understand that when we throw, they should have, if they're going to have a little bit of discomfort when they finish, it should be gone within a couple hours. And so there's a 2-hour window there where they may be a little sore from working out. But I think from a young age, it's just kind of understanding the differences between those things. So is it sharp? Is it pain? Like, can you put your finger on it? Is it just feel tight? I think that's a good point. Can you play catch? Right. Did it bother you on one throw? Things like that. And then, but there's always these little flags before it gets there. All right. And so the elbow doesn't straighten out, or when they do a forearm stretch on the table, all right, one side feels tighter than the other. So the throwing side may be a little tighter, but it shouldn't be, because that means we're not stretching enough. And then we go into, okay, how long should you hold a stretch? We go that over a lot. And how hard should you stretch? So what the studies show is that you should hold a stretch. If you're trying to increase flexibility, you should hold it for 1 minute, and the stretch should get less over that time. So meaning that if the stretch is on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 is no stretch, 10 is like something's about to pop. Let's say it's a 4. By the end of the minute, it should at least be a 3.5. If not, it means you're stretching too hard. The muscle's fighting you, so you really haven't done anything. So how you stretch is very important, and how long you hold the stretch is very important. Okay? And then secondly, doing some type of tissue work. Nowadays, you have these hypervolt, you have all the massage guns, you can use a crossball, a lot of different ways to do some light massage in that area to help you recover. And then you're right. It also depends on, which we neglect a lot of times, is what else is going on in that young man's life, right? Does he have tests? Is it a big game? How's he doing life in general? Because that hypes up the central nervous system. And when the central nervous system is hyped up, everything's a little more stressful. In big leagues, and we talked about Mike Schilt before this, right? Mike educated me this years ago. On the big league level, a pitch is not a pitch, right? If I got a runner in scoring position, that pitch is like 1.2, all right, on the pitch count, right? And when you throw in an inning, depending on the age group, after 10 or after 15, every pitch is worth probably 2. And so I always tell people, like, I could have you do, Austin, I could have you do 100 squats in a row. You'd really feel that the next day. But if I had you do 10 squats, wait 10 minutes, do another 10 squats, wait 10 minutes, do another 10 squats, wait 10 minutes. So that's where the pitch count is, right? And so we just look at total pitches, But it's really like, okay, were they when they in scoring position when when you got on? Did what was the stress level during the game, and how many did you throw in one inning? 30 pitches is not 30 pitches, right? And so you have to factor all that in because there is a fatigue element that occurs, and so that's why pitch counts are in theory good. But I wish it was that easy, right? Because a pitch is not a pitch. And so you've gone through this, right? I mean, you bring a kid in and, he comes in relief, but, runners on second and third, he threw 5 pitches and got out. Those 5 pitches were probably worth, 12 for the stress on his body. And so you just factor all that in, but then look for the signs, right? So is the elbow stiff, back of the shoulder stiff? And if you do, treat it and should be able to play a position, no issues. But maybe he doesn't throw it. Maybe he doesn't take 50 ground balls from short that day, or you just say, just get it over to first. Don't worry about trying to throw a P over to first base. So
Such a good point because not every pitch is created equal, right?
that's
Those
right.
high leverage pitches are a little different than the warm up throws, for sure. And
Yeah.
that's a very very valid point. I really wish that, and if you pitched, you understand the difference.
Absolutely. And, today we'll see, especially with the spin rates and everything coming out today, the grip pressures today we think are increasing the stress on the elbow. So you have velo, but now you have different grip pressures trying to make a designer pitch, and kids learn that. And it really struck home to me. I would see 2 kids a year that were like 12 years old, and they would have medial elbow pain. All right, and I would come in, and so first school of thought like, okay, what are you throwing? You should just be throwing fastballs and you shouldn't be doing anything funky at 12. And they would come in and say, look, I started throwing a change and, a month later, my elbows bother me. Okay. And then talking to pitching coach, yeah, they were gripping and doing a circle change. They were gripping it so hard, right, because their hands are a little small that extra pressure, all right, made it tight. And then they got it. So that even before we talked about spin rates and all this kind of stuff and designing pitches, right, you would see kids if they grip it too hard. And, and then we saw when they got rid of a lot of the spider tech and stuff they used to kind of make their fingers a little sticky, a lot of pitchers thought like, yeah, I got some more elbow pain because I'm having to grip it harder. So there's some of that as well that we go through and see that with kids. And so just understanding that it's, you just have to look for these signs and they're usually there. So if I could, elbow straight, back of the shoulder, internal rotation flexible, good follow through, we would. And to that point, I tell kids like the majority of your throws are going to be playing catch before practice. And so if you'll follow through just with those, like you're not going to follow through from shortstop. You're not going to follow through all the time from playing third or whatever, right? But you're going to take more throws playing catch before the start of practice and you're going to take from third. So if you follow through then you'll be better just with that.
All good stuff. And one of the things you mentioned too, not just with the throwing, but I want to kind of spend a minute on what pitchers do before they actually pick up a baseball.
Yeah.
One of the things that's become a big deal with pitchers, pretty much, and position players as well, are plyos. And so I'd like for you to talk a little bit about your take on plyos, the importance of doing them properly if you're going to do them, and also weighted baseballs and in terms of arm strengthening, velocity, et cetera, chasing velo. Camp on those two topics.
Yeah, great question, right? And kind of everybody's got a different take on the weighted balls. Usually what the studies show is that you do get a temporary bump when you do weighted balls. They're better if you're skeletally mature. But I always ask the kids, I go, where do you generate your velo from? Right. In 36 years, I've never had a kid tell me they generate it from their arm. They always generate from their hips and the separation between upper back and hips. Right. And so the question really becomes, do they get stronger or do they get better because for 6 weeks they really worked on mechanics and everything else when they're doing the weighted ball program, right? But I do think going back to the question, before you throw, there should be some band work or some light plyos or something just to loosen up to facilitate those muscles in your arm. Because remember, the only function of that is really decel your arm, get your arm in a good position to throw and support your arm when you get in layback. So they don't have to be incredibly strong. They're going to be timed up. And again, if I'm going from studying in school, going from classroom to play, I need to do something before I start playing catch to just get get everything kind of timed up and get my muscles firing because they haven't been firing well all day. And so it used to be you would play catch to loosen up. Now kids play catch. They throw too hard too soon. Right. And so a lot of kids that we see, I'll say, look, you know how you get there and you're throwing with a guy and he throws like 6 pitches. I'm good. All right. And you got to throw with 2 or 3 people. There's no way you can be warmed up in 6 pitches or 10 pitches or whatever. Take your time to loosen up. But I do think the plyos, and we kind of leave it to the individual pitchers. We start them off with like, do some plyos, do your reverse ball throws, do some throws against the wall, things like that. Again, just to loosen up. And and you'll kind of find your rhythm. So if we're having them do band work or plyos to rehab, they'll do a third of that, maybe a quarter of that before they throw, just to get the muscles to fire. And then they'll come and do more later based on whether they just long toss that day or they threw a pin that day, et cetera, et cetera. But I think spending time with, the pitching coach or the trainer or whatever, someone that's fairly knowledgeable about technique on how to do plyos is key. So they're doing it well. But it's interesting because guys are doing a lot. Like if you look at Paul Skeen stuff, I mean, he's doing 2 hours of stuff. And so, like, is that necessary? I think part of it is because, as you know, baseball is as much about confidence as anything else. If that's what Paul feels like he's got to do, that's part of his psyche that he's prepared when he gets on the mound, and that helps him, right? Do we think that's necessary? Probably not, but it's part of what he does, right? So, okay. So, I mean, you or I need to do 2 hours. We need to find out what works for us. And then when it gets to that, game day type of situation, I always tell kids, like, there's only 3 ways you're going to feel on game day. You're going to feel great, probably 20% of the time, maybe. You're going to feel like dog 15% of the time. And then somewhere in the middle, you're going to feel just okay. Right. So you got to have 3 warm-ups, right? Because you wake up that day and you feel like a dog, like that is no indicator of your performance that day, right? You can look at when Nolan Ryan pitched his 7th no-hitter, he couldn't touch his toes. He had back pain. He threw a no-hitter. You look at Michael Jordan's flu game. So scored 36 points. And so, but where kids get anxious though, is they correlate how they feel with how they're going to perform. No correlation at all. So if you feel great, I may throw a few, I'm good to go. All right. Feel okay. I got my normal routine. If I feel like dog that day, then I'm going to, all right, I'm going to get there a little earlier. I'm going to take my time. I'm going to warm up a little slower, got my routine. And then it kind of calms them down that they're in control, because that's what anxiety is, right? I don't feel in control. And so same thing in between innings, right? If they had a bad inning, okay, what am I do? What am I going to focus on? So a lot of that time we focus on there. And so, but the plyos and all that, I think finding a rhythm, they're not doing too much, but they're doing the right to load their arm before they throw is key.
Question for you in regards to the weight room.
Yeah.
If a pitcher is scheduled to throw a bullpen, face hitters that day, or certainly pitching a ball game, where are you at on a guy lifting, doing anything strenuous in the weight room prior to a pitch day?
Yeah, great question. Right. I try to get them to lift after, but also if they've got to go, like when we were, like I said, when I was with the Knights, you had relief pitchers, they got to get their lift in. I don't know if they're going in or not, but there was about a 3-hour break. So they would come in and lift at 3. Well, they're not going to the game until 9. So plenty of time to recover. And so that's what we tell the kids. So, if they got to get something that day, they got to have 3 hours before they're going to throw minimal, all right, or else probably not best to do that day. You can do some light band work, light plyos, do it that way, but definitely not to get fatigued before they throw for sure.
Very good. Now you work with guys that are in spring training right now and have for many, many years that play this game at the highest level, all the way down to youth guys and everything in between. Most of our audience, I would say, is going to be high school related. What is the difference? What's the performance gap between the elite athlete, the guys that are playing for money, guys playing on TV, they're in spring training right this second, and the high school guy who wants to be able to accomplish that? What's the difference between, a kid that's a teenager, 15, 16, 17 years old, and a big leaguer?
Yeah, the biggest difference is this. I think as you move up the ladder, you just get kind of more dialed in for the most part, and you realize the various nuances, right? So a high school kid is going to get enamored by velo. A professional guy is going to be velo is important, but if I don't put it in the right spot, it doesn't help me one bit because these guys can time up anything. I remember back when we used to play with the Knights, and it was covering the Knights. Atlanta had a pitcher that threw 100, right? But, I was sitting there with Jeff Schaefer, was a former big leaguer. I was on the bench with him one night, and he's like, first 2 guys, he's going to throw it right by him. By the 3rd guy, we're timing this thing up. I mean, they were like salivating. And I'm like, this guy's throwing 100. And by the 3rd one, they timed it up, and because his ball was straight. He couldn't locate as well, which is why he was in AAA, not in the big leagues. But that's part of it, and understanding how they field the position, understanding how to set up hitters, really the art of pitching, right? And so we tell kids, like, if you can throw down and away and up and in, and you can locate and you can change eye level and bat speed, you can dominate with 1 or 2 pitches. And so not at the big league level, you can't, but at a low level, if you can locate, that's key. Well, you can't locate unless your mechanics are consistent. So if your curveball's, up top and your fastball's out in front, a hitter's going to pick up on that. The better hitters are. And then again, it goes back to follow through, and can I get more extension of the ball closer to home plate? Everything's going to break later. which is hard to pick up. And so those are the biggest things. The other thing I think is they're more intentional about nutrition and how they recover, more protein, more flexibility work, not more. I've got to recover more. I think that they're, those two things, and then sleep. They know more about sleep today than we obviously did when we were kids. How important that is, how important deep sleep and REM sleep is. That should be about 45% of your sleep cycle. And so all those things put together, then they're doing something different than the high school. And honestly, the high school kids got a tougher job. School from 7:30 to probably 3, go right to practice. They get home at 6 or 7. They got to study and repeat the cycle. It's a lot more stressful on a high school frame that's growing. And so the sooner the kid can kind of dial in and learn some of these nuances, those are the kids that excel. And then depending on where you are in college, hopefully the program piggybacks on all that. But if not, at least you've got a background to go into that.
For the high school coach, the high school athlete, maybe a parent who's listening to this right now, what's something that they can implement? Yeah, obviously not knowing what they're doing right now presently, but what's something they can implement tomorrow if they want to be healthier, improve their performance, get better at their craft? What's something they can easily do? And how can you guys help them do that?
Well, I think for us, right, we would come in and look at some mechanics and look at their just total body flexibility. As a growing athlete, they're all stiff in certain areas. The easiest thing they can do, though, because they all want to be stronger, right? The easiest thing you can do is get 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. Right? If I could preach that and put that on my forehead or whatever, I would do that because kids want to be stronger, but they don't get enough protein. They think that's a lot of protein. So I take a 150-pound athlete, right? That's 150 grams of protein. So that literally is 20 to 30 grams of protein at 5 meals a day or 5 snacks a day, whatever it's going to be. Most kids don't get that. So they're lifting and they're growing, and basically everything they're eating is just going to a little bit of growth. And then they're like, I want to get stronger. We can't get stronger unless you get enough protein in your diet. But the key is only 600 calories. 1 gram of protein is worth 4 calories. So if 150 grams, all right, 150-pound kid, 150 grams, that's 600 calories. 600 calories out of a normal male diet, which is like 2,500 calories. We're only talking about 20 to 25% of the diet coming from protein. So you do the math, like I should be able to do that. But it's difficult because I don't have a big window to eat because I've got school. And so it's a protein bar, a protein powder, and a shaker so they can put some water in and get 30 grams of protein in. Those things help you recover the most so you can get stronger. That's the easiest thing to do. The second one is you got to work on your flexibility. And so we want to look at the hot spots, forearm, back of the shoulder, hamstring, so you can follow through well, right, and get an assessment for that. And then the last thing I would say is if you lie on a table or a bench, right, and do what we call a one-arm T, which is just raising your arm out to the side, but you're lying on your stomach, one arm T with thumb up, you should be able to do 5% of your body weight, 20 reps. Okay? If not, you're not strong enough in your upper back. So those decel muscles need to be stronger. Okay? And you should be able to do 3 sets of that. Right? And you will usually find that most kids aren't quite strong enough, again, because we don't work upper back muscles a lot, right? We can bench, we know how much we can squat. We'll say, how much can you do on T and bent T on the ball? Like, they don't know what that is or how strong should it be, right? So we have to say, I tell our staff, like, you can't say someone needs to be stronger unless you tell them what that is. And so for us, what it shows in the literature is the one arm T, 20 reps. A lot of minor league teams use that now just as a baseline. And so if they could do those 3 things, protein, gap muscles, one arm T, and then work on their flexibility, I'd have less work to do. So which is a good thing. Or we could work on some higher level stuff.
I can tell through our time together so far today, we're going to need to do another one of these podcasts, Alan.
Yeah.
This is really informative for a parent, for a player, for a coach, anyone within earshot of this podcast. Good stuff. Before we go ahead and finish up, and hopefully I can get you to agree to a rematch here of coming back and talking baseball and talking healthcare. How can we? I guess before we finish up, is there something else that you would like for folks to know that we haven't covered in this podcast? Kind of a parting shot, if you will. Something that folks need to know.
I think the big thing, right? So in healthcare, most people grow up seeing doctors. You don't have to have a referral to see us. We file insurance just like anybody else. And so you can call, make an appointment. I would encourage parents, like healthcare is very reactive. We're trying to be proactive. So when you have an ache or a pain, a little forearm tightness, little medial elbow pain, inside elbow pain or shoulder pain, whatever, get it checked out sooner than later. And go in and see a physical therapist. that deals a lot with sports. We obviously have them. We're in Greenville, Fort Mill, Neyland, et cetera, Charlotte area. But it's not really about us. It's about seeing the therapist to tell you. Because I tell parents all the time, like MRI can be fine, but it's not going to tell you what to do with it today. Your shoulder still hurts. Your forearm's still tight. So what are you going to do about it? And then the key is if you get in to see the therapist, if it's not progressing, the therapist will usually know who in town is the best orthopedist for you to see. But most importantly, they'll know which orthopedist you should not see, which one's going to hold you out, which one sees a ton of throwers, because the easiest thing in medicine is to say, don't throw. Right. Well, okay. Well, can they play catch? How about shag fly balls? Can they hit? Can they field ground balls and put the ball in the bucket? All those things, because our dog in the fight is I don't want any kid not to play the sport. Right. And so because being around coaches, being around other teammates, these are life skills. Right. So can I cheer for others? Can I still go to work? And when I'm not 100%, all these things we look as an employer, when I look to hire people, these are all things I'm looking at, life skills, right? Which is why most of our therapists are former athletes. And so I don't want to keep the kid out. So the easiest thing is like, well, don't throw. Well, and then what happens is they don't throw, they feel better, but we didn't get to the cause of why they have elbow pain or shoulder pain to begin with. And now they go throw, and then they have elbow or shoulder pain. And now we got MRI. Now the cost to the healthcare system is even more. So if they start with a therapist, they're much better off, and then we can refer them. And actually, the orthopedists prefer that because think about it. If you're, Austin, if you're a surgeon, what you don't want in your office is a bunch of people that don't need surgery. And so we actually screen everyone. All right. And that's why if I call a doctor, they pick up because I got something for them. And so typically it's 95 to 5 that what we see, they just need management, what to do, like we just talked about, stretch, things like that. And they're much better off. So that's what I would encourage parents to do. See us when they have an ache or pain, not before they have to get shut down.
How can people reach Alan Tyson, your team, one of your 15 venues where you guys treat folks? Where can they get more literature? How can people find a little bit more out if they have more questions?
Yeah, well, we're going to work with you guys to do some screenings because, again, we're going to try to, get ahead of all this, what's tight, what's weak, things like that. But if you go to architectsports.com, architect with an H on the end for like technology, technical, things like that, as opposed to a T, architectsports.com, it's got our offices listed, it's got our phone numbers. Call. You don't need a doctor's referral to see us. We'll file insurance. We'll tell you if your network. We take all major insurance companies, not an issue. And then we'll be sending out some articles and working with you guys to send all the stuff that we just talked about. And the next podcast, even more, we'll be talking about all these things to help the parents, navigate this kind of crazy landscape of throwing, a little round ball.
Very good. Well, this has been very informative. I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah.
Really, really good stuff. So, folks, there it is. Alan Tyson, Architect Sports. He told you how to find out a little bit more, but we'll bring you back. There'll be a lot more. Certainly, we just hit on a few topics. There's so much more to cover and keep kids on the field and keep them healthy, but also keep them with their arrow pointed up. So, we'll go ahead and wind this thing down. Just appreciate you guys joining us today here at Diamond Prospects. We do these podcasts for you. Hopefully, you've enjoyed this one, whether you're driving down the road. Maybe you're sitting at work. Maybe you're headed to a ball game yourself. Make sure you check out our website, thediamondprospects.com, for everything you need. We've got schedules on there for teams that are playing, particularly with all the tournaments that are cranking up. We'll have pitching rotations if those are available. All that's going to be listed on there for college coaches, but also for baseball fans looking for a baseball game. And of course, when we go out to a ballpark, we're going to write up what we see. We'll have our radar gun. We'll have our stopwatch. We'll have information. We'll have video going out on social media for you guys to be able to see what we saw, but also we'll chronicle it for you so you can see what we thought about what we saw. So we appreciate the time. Alan Tyson, I really appreciate you coming on today. Thank you for Architect Sports. Welcome to our team. We're very fortunate to now call you a teammate, and we'll certainly be doing this again real soon.
Super. Thanks, guys.
Well, thank you for everybody. We'll hopefully see you at the ballpark real soon. For Diamond Prospects, I'm Austin Alexander signing off.